let's just do one more. Let's do one more, and then let's call it a night. Let's see if there's one more of the big ones that people might have in their mind. And also I'll say here, like, if you're watching this or listening to this and you have verses that are coming to mind and you're thinking, well, what about this one? What about this one? If no matter what place you're coming from, you know, some might be coming from a place of wanting to debate, in a sense, what we're saying, and that's totally fine. Go ahead, share the verses in the comments, or if you have a question, maybe you're struggling and like, well, I want to think more and believe what you're saying, but I have these hangups with these verses over here. Well, let us know what those verses are. Let us know what those hangups might be that you have, and you can put those in the comments of the video. And I would be really interested to know what your guys' thoughts are if you do have other verses come to mind, and we might get to some of those in a future video as well. So
I thought it might be fun, actually, just because we're already kind of talking about this passage, but I don't know if you're familiar with Daniel 12:2.
Off the top of my head.
Yeah, no, that's fine.
So
Daniel 12:2 is another one, and I think just because we were talking about Isaiah 66, this would be another one, a good one to bring in. So in Daniel 12, just starting at the beginning, it says, "Now at that time, Michael, the great prince who stands guard over the sons of your people, will arise, and there will be a time of distress such as never occurred since there was a nation until that time. And at that time, your people, everyone who is found written in the book, will be rescued. Many of those who sleep in the dust of the ground will awake, these to everlasting life, but the others to disgrace and everlasting contempt." So again, we now have that word coming in again, everlasting, that we're talking about. Yeah. And again, I want to draw people's attention to that we have, again, a contrast of life with something else. So we've seen life with punishment. We've seen life being contrasted with hell. Now we have life being contrasted with disgrace and everlasting contempt. And so when we see that word, everlasting contempt, we're thinking again, like, oh, okay, well, that's talking about people who are, I don't know, living in, their, I guess I don't even know how they would describe it anymore. I'm so ingrained in my view. I'm trying to represent the other side as best I can. But what's funny about that word, we've already talked about the idea of everlasting and then a noun. That's a noun in the Hebrew. It's not saying everlasting being held in contempt, everlasting by people. That's not what it's saying. It's just saying everlasting contempt. So that word, though, in the Hebrew is used in Isaiah 66, where we just were, where it talks about looking over. Oh my goodness, I'll have to pull it back up. Do you still have Isaiah 66 open?
Yep.
So if you want to read it, I believe it's in the last line of that verse. Let's see here, I'm almost.
Oh, here it is. So I'll just read it here. So, "Then they will go out and look at the corpses of the people who have rebelled against me, for their worm will not die, their fire will not be extinguished, and they will be an abhorrence to all mankind."
Right. Yep. Thank you. So that word abhorrence, or just depending on, obviously in Daniel 12:2, it's translated as contempt. It's the same word. So contempt, abhorrence is just bringing that idea. I mean, those words are pretty similar. But it's using the same word there, again, looking out over the dead bodies of God's enemies. So again, this isn't saying that it's not that the people are going to be feeling contempt. I think people think like, oh, some are going to raise to eternal life, others will be raised and they'll be feeling contempt for the rest of their lives. It's like, no, it's obviously coming from those who are still alive as having contempt for God's enemies. So it's like when we think about like, Hitler, like there is still a contempt from all of humanity when we think about him, right? This is coming from the point of view of like, we can talk about Hitler in this contemptuous way because of what he did. And so
he's not experiencing that contempt.
Right. So yeah, some are experiencing everlasting life. Others are experiencing eternal contempt, right? They're not experiencing it, but they're they're not currently undergoing it, but it's how we view them, right? And so I think it's such an interesting contrast, because two of the biggest passages in the Old Testament that people will use, again, it just bringing it back to this idea of like, not only is it contrasting life with this other thing, but again, all we have to go off is God's slain enemies, these people who have been destroyed by God. And so I think that's just another helpful one to sort of bring more of a dynamic to this Isaiah passage, which translates into Mark. And so there's just a theme that you start to see here going on.
Absolutely. And what I'm noticing, because, I can't remember the last time I looked at this passage or even thought about it in relation to this whole discussion about hell, but I can remember a time when I still held to the eternal conscious torment view, that when I would even have any questions about the view at all, I would think about this verse. This verse would come to mind, and I'd be like, I might have the thought of like, I can't really think of like, does the Old Testament even support eternal conscious torment at all? And this would be one of the verses that would come to mind. I'd be like, oh yeah, well, there it is. It's obviously there. Now, having not thought about this verse for quite some time and looking at it again, it's really hard for me to see that. And I would say at the very least, it is very ambiguous as to whether this verse is saying that the people under that punishment, that they are conscious of this, that this is in any way a straightforward text that's saying there will be people in the afterlife who are conscious and consciously experiencing contempt. Looking at this now, I'm like, you really can't get that from this. I mean, sure, you could say that maybe that points that way. And I'm not saying it again, I don't think either of us are saying this is a clear text to support your view or mine or anything else. It's just that this isn't, if you're going to go to the Bible and you're going to these texts as your proof text for the eternal conscious torment, traditional view of hell, the so-called traditional view of hell, then I think it's worth questioning if these texts are really as clear and straightforward as you may have thought. Because if you just look at this, if you give this to somebody who has not been ingrained with an eternal conscious torment view, and you tell them to read this and ask them, what does this say? I would doubt that they would take this verse or even the other ones maybe that we have talked about and conclude that, well, what this means is that when people who reject God die, they will continue to live forever and ever, just in a state of torment and punishment and pain and misery. I don't think that's what somebody who was approaching this without lenses, without their preconceived ideas, I don't think they would come to that conclusion. And I think more than that, probably, I don't think that the audience of the day, to whom this text was written, Daniel 12, the Jewish audience, I don't think that is at all what they would have gotten from this. And I'm no expert by any stretch in Jewish traditions or rabbinical teachings or anything like that. But I don't think eternal conscious torment is where they would have gone with this. Maybe I'm wrong. I don't know.
Well, and another thing too is that for people who are out there wondering, I mean, this is the only two times in the Old Testament this word is used. This word for contempt or abhorrence. So we have one time where it's being referenced to God's slain enemies, and we have another time where it's being contrasted with people awaking to eternal life. So if that's all you have to go off of, the context would lead us to believe that to try to apply this to someone who's conscious or even alive, it's a huge mountain to climb. And even if we back up a little bit into this Daniel 12:2 text, starting at the beginning of verse 2, it says, many of those who sleep. So this is talking about many, not all, but many who sleep will awake to eternal life. But the others, so who are these others? Well, they're the ones that are not part of the many who awake to life, right? So they're not coming awake. They're not going to be conscious. They're not going to be given life again, right? They're going to go away into eternal contempt, right? The contempt that we feel for them as being God's enemies. So there are many who awake, but there are others who won't, and there will be an eternal contempt that they will be viewed with for the rest of eternity. They will be as the ones in Isaiah 66 who are looked upon with disgrace as being God's enemies, as being slain corpses with maggots eating them and fire consuming them. So again, I'm not trying to make a knockdown argument, but it at least should give you pause to say, like, where am I getting this from in this text? You know, and like you said in the comments, I mean, I am as open to changing my mind as anyone else. I would love to hear the best arguments for these passages if you think that you have them. I'd like to think I've heard all of them and remain unconvinced, but I'm certainly open to people pushing back and weighing in. But I just don't know how you would get that from these texts. It's the leaps just become wider and wider, and it seems like you almost have to start with the presupposition in order for the text to say this, rather than saying, no, I was actually able to pull it out of this text. I don't know how you do that with this one.
Absolutely. And I all we've really done here is looked at a handful of some of the main texts that would commonly be used to support eternal conscious torment view. And there's, probably a couple of the main ones that we didn't cover, and hopefully we can do in the future, is the ones out of Revelation, which in my mind are some of the weakest ones, just because the context in which they're found, and when you think about the kind of literature that Revelation is, being highly symbolic, hyperbolic, that you would get, a draw out. I don't think it's one of the stronger cases that can be made, in spite of it maybe on the surface looking like it's one of the stronger, more clear passages to teach the traditional view of hell. I just don't think it is, but hopefully we can talk about those in the future. I hope what this has done again is to help you to think, I guess, and for some of you maybe feel permission. Some of you might be very much not opposed to anything we're saying, but just maybe breathing a sigh of relief a bit, that it's maybe at the thought that maybe it's okay to rethink this idea of hell. I know that a lot of people that come to this channel terrified of the unforgivable sin. That's one of the most common comments I get on this channel, is people that are just terrified of that. And I'm persuaded that many of those people are in the state they're in this terrified state they're in, because of this view of hell that I believe is wrong and incorrect. And I think in many cases it damages people psychologically, mentally, spiritually, in some sense. And so yeah, I hope for some of you that you're able to breathe a bit of a sigh of relief